We are continuing to process this collection. We are beginning our 8th year of work on this collection. So what you are seeing here today is an adaptation from the original documented history. And it brings us to the point that here in New York, women had legal rights early in the American period that women did not enjoy in other colonies and states. This is partially due to elements of Dutch law and also due to a certain open-mindedness that I know many native New Yorkers would say has always characterized our state society. But a woman would have the right to bring a suit against a man, whereas in other states in the same period, she would have to have a male relation or friend bring that suit on her behalf. So we are welcoming public participation. We have a few speaking roles that have already been filled. We have our volunteer justice of the peace, first close. Oh, no. We have our volunteer apprentice who will be speaking later, Sophia. And then we could use one further volunteer to be our constable, our bailiff, just in case the crowd gets a little rowdy. So would anyone like to volunteer to be our constable today?
I nominate Richie Bazinski.
Hey, quiet there. You don't nominate me unless I say so.
Come up here and sit down.
Which is, no, he can stand in the back. And,
Don't tell me what to do.
but that is the kind of attitude we are looking for. Early 19th century justice of the peace. Without further ado, we will kick off, and I believe we will begin with Mr. Barkis, our clerk of court, swearing in the justices.
Good. 3.
You do swear in the presence of Almighty God that you will well and truly try the matter in difference between plaintiffs and defendants, and a true verdict will give according to evidence.
I do.
It is.
Court is in session,
Yes,
sir.
sir. You fur by your. Who fur by your
Hey,
hair?
hey. Let's not cause any trouble in this place. I'm the sheriff here. The constable or something. Well, I don't know from, wait a minute, you don't ask me who I am. Who are you?
I look for fur by her.
Oh,
Sir, the court is in session, and I must ask you to either be quiet or to
What
leave the
court?
room. Constable, if you would remove this man. He's obviously drunk.
let's go find that Bob.
Larry.
Oh, Leanie. Okay, come on, lean over here.
I'm Jacques.
Oh, Jacques.
I'm Jacques.
Oh,
Yeah.
say Jacques.
I say Jacques.
Oh, I thought you said Jacques.
You know here.
Not how.
Where we go?
To the bar, where else?
Mr. Marges, what is our first case today?
The first complainant today is Jane Hitchcock, spinster. She requested judgment against Robert Howe for damages resulting from a trespass on case.
If Jane Hitchcock is present, would she please step forward at this time? Jane?
Yes,
Do you acknowledge yourself to be the Jane Hitchcock specified in the complaint?
I do.
You swear upon this. You do swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence you shall give in this matter, in difference between yourself and the defendant, shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Now, what exactly do you seek from us today?
I seek $500.
Miss Hitchcock, you do understand that this court is only empowered to give judgments for $25 and less.
I did not understand that, but is not a court a court?
It is not, madam. According to the $25 Act, the justices of the peace may hear cases of that value or less. Anything above that must be heard by the county court in Poughkeepsie. However, we do have the authority to hold an evidentiary hearing today, and if we find that there is significant evidence to support your claim, we will forward our report to the judges in Poughkeepsie and ensure that you receive a full and fair hearing there.
Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Will you state the particulars of your case then?
In July of the last year, Mr. Robert Howe, also single at the time, agreed to marry me. He made a promise to marry me. I began to sell my goods and to go about my business. I let my apprentice go. And I now, all these months later, have nothing.
What was your status when you made this marriage proposal?
I was single.
And did Robert Howe make any form of written contract or agreement with you?
He did not.
Well, how have you sustained damage from this unfulfilled marriage promise?
I have sold parts of my business. I have been selling things to pay off my debts. I have let my apprentice go. My business has suffered because I fully expected to move to Poughkeepsie to be married to Mr. Howe and to take up my life there.
Do you have any evidence that your total loss amounts to $500?
I have my ledgers.
Very good. Would you submit them to the court for review?
How many witnesses do you have present with us today?
I believe you have at least 2 witnesses to call today.
You are correct. I do. You found me an apprentice.
So I believe the first one that I have here in my notes from our earlier conversation is a Miss Elisebeth Powers.
That is correct.
You wish to call her at this time?
Yes, please.
Miss Powers, if you are present, please come to the front. Mr. Barkus, if you would swear her in.
You do swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence you shall give in this matter, the difference between the plaintiff Jane Hitchcock and the defendant Robert Howe, shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. So, I've been a loyal customer for many years, and when I heard that she'd be going to Poughkeepsie, I immediately decided to settle my debts with her because I knew she was trying to close all her accounts. However, I unfortunately did not have hard specie on me at the time. So what she's been doing is she's been accepting money less than the full amount owed. For instance, I recently bought this bonnet from her, which originally she told me would be about $5, but she let me settle my debts for only $2. So I believe she's been doing this with most of her customers. She's been losing very much money through this. I know personally I'm a mantua maker locally, and I've been forced to ask for country produce in payment because there's just not a lot of hard specie or hard coin around these days. So I know I'm personally having hard times with my business. I currently am seeking extra work teaching children the skills of needlework. So I can vouch for her here, and I know how hard it is, must be for her.
It is very difficult indeed.
Yes.
Oh, do either of you have more questions for this witness?
I don't believe so.
I do. Do you think the $500 is a reasonable sum of loss considering her business?
I do indeed. It's completely uprooted her life. 500 is definitely fair.
Is there any further questions for this witness?
No.
All right, then this witness is dismissed. Mrs. Hitchcock, please call your next witness.
I believe my next witness is my apprentice.
Yes, your apprentice Sophia.
You do swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence you shall give in this matter, and the difference between the plaintiff Jane Hitchcock and the defendant Robert Howe, shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Mr. Close.
Aha, Mr. Cagle.
I believe you have a question for this witness.
Yes, I do. Would you relate to the court what circumstances transpired with Miss Hitchcock?
Yes, sir. I served Miss Hitchcock for 5 years after Mr. Cable apprenticed me to her. There were still 4 years left on my contract, but my family and Mr. Cagle would not permit me to remove to Poughkeepsie. Miss Hitchcock had to pay the town for the remainder of my time, a sum of $50. I also witnessed Miss Hitchcock settling accounts with customers for far less than the ledger balance in order to secure my money.
How many customers did you witness Miss Hitchcock settling with in this manner?
I saw her settle with at least a dozen in this manner.
Are there any further questions for this witness?
I do not have any.
Thank you, Ms. Step down.
Speaking of our overseer of the poor, Mr. Cagle, I believe I see him here today. Are you here, sir?
Yes, Your Honors.
Would you be able to confirm this witness's testimony regarding our milliner's loss in this matter?
That I can.
Please step forward and be sworn in.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence you shall give in this matter, and the difference between the plaintiff, Jane Hitchcock, and the defendant, Robert Howe, shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Cagle, would you relate to the court what circumstances transpired with Miss Hitchcock?
It was about 3 years ago, Miss Hitchcock approached me about finding an apprentice, and Sophia, whose parents are deserving poor chargeable to the town of Rhinebeck, was engaged to her as apprentice for a term of 7 years. Late last year, Miss Hitchcock approached me about the possibility of removing to the village of Poughkeepsie, and whether she may bring her apprentice with her or not. However, as the girl's parents have no legal settlement in the village of Poughkeepsie, nor would the overseers of the poor in the village provide them with one, she faced two options: either to remain in Red Hook or to lose her apprenticeship and indemnify the town for the value of the young girl until she could be bound out again. I judged a sum of $50 appropriate, a sum to which Miss Hitchcock agreed.
Mr. Cagle, did Miss Hitchcock indicate why she wanted to remove to the village of Poughkeepsie?
She did not.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Cagle. I believe, gentlemen, that we must see if Mr. Howe is present, if he might have some information to give in this matter. Mr. Howe, are you with us today?
I'm here.
Do you have anything you would like to say in your defense?
I would.
Please approach the bench and be sworn in.
You do swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence that you shall give in this matter between Jane Hitchcock and yourself shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Mr. Howe, did you make a marriage promise with Miss Hitchcock, as she claims?
I did not.
Do you know Miss Hitchcock?
I do. I'm a buying agent for Mr. Vassar's brewery in Poughkeepsie, and I travel Dutchess County buying crops of grain. I've spent a good deal of time here in Red Hook. I was here in July, I believe, to purchase crops from the various farmers. I bought almost the entire wheat crop in the town. And might I say, Your Honors, you're all welcome to the Oyster Saloon in Poughkeepsie gratis if you'd like to visit.
Consider that. Now, so was it business that led you to make Miss Hitchcock's acquaintance?
It was not. I was staying at Mr. Andrus's hotel, which is full of post travelers in the summertime. I met her in the coffee house.
And did any conversations that you had with her there, particularly around last July, tend towards marriage?
They did not. They were pleasant. I find her very agreeable, but there was no discussion.
So, are you familiar with Miss Hitchcock beyond the level of mere acquaintance?
I'm not.
He was.
Still your tongue, woman.
Have you returned to Rhinebeck or Reddick since July last?
I came back in December to pay hard currency to all of the farmers here, and did not stay. I took the late coach back to Poughkeepsie. There's been no contact between us since July.
That isn't a lie. I have the letters to prove it.
But you submit these letters to be reviewed, madam, by the court. Do you have anything further to say in your defense, sir, now that letters have been proffered?
I do not.
My fellow justices, do you have any further questions for this individual?
Are there any further witnesses that either of you'd like to call?
No, and I would really like to make the last coach back to Poughkeepsie.
Working on our time, I'm afraid. Well,
Very well. I believe we shall confer. Do we find sufficient evidence in this case to bind Mr. Kennedy or Mr. Howe over for prosecution in Poughkeepsie? We have the account ledgers that prove the damage. We have witness testimony, and we have letters of a suspiciously romantic nature. I can see some tender phrases.
This is your handwriting, sir?
It is certainly not in a woman's hand.
This is your handwriting.
I see nothing but friendship.
I see nothing but your hand here.
So we have letters, we have proven financial damages, witnesses who were willing to swear to a significant fortune, in fact, that has been lost, seemingly in good faith, by Ms. Hitchcock.
Indeed.
I don't know how we could not forward this case.
Mr. Brinkle, do you agree?
I agree.
Very good. Then it is our determination, as the justices of the peace of Red Hook, that following this session, immediately we will go into recess, that Mr. Howe will be bound over with a recognizance to appear at the next general sessions of the peace in Poughkeepsie, or to suffer, I believe, the current rate, Mr. Barkis, is $120 surety that he must pay, as well as being jailed right adjacent to the oyster bar that his employer runs. But furthermore, to ensure that the court does not waste its time, Ms. Hitchcock, we do expect you to fill out a bond as well that you will prosecute this case before the judge.
I should be very pleased to.
But we will return your evidence to you at the conclusion during the recess, and we will forward our report to the judges in Poughkeepsie.
Thank you, sir.
Very well. Do we have any other immediate cases before the docket at the moment, Mr. Barkis?
There are other cases, you want to pull them out?
Yes, I believe we should recess, gentlemen. Do you agree?
Very good.
Very good. Very well. The court is now adjourned until when do you think we should resume our deliberation?
After
dinner, right?
So 2:30. Would that seem reasonable? Very good. Well, the court will resume session at 2:30 today. We are dismissed. So, ladies. But it is a document that is preserved in our court records from 1806, so we know that a woman named Jane Hitchcock did launch a suit against a man named Robert Howe for failure to fulfill a marriage promise, and that she claimed $500, which is a significant sum of money for that period of time. A rule of thumb, how many of you own a house? Or have otherwise employed a carpenter to do a little work here and there? Well, you know how much a carpenter will charge for a full day of work now. At this point in time in Dutchess County, a carpenter would generally earn $1 a day. So that gives you an idea of how much $500 meant during the period. You also heard a minor detail that is very significant, both for our second session this afternoon and for Dutchess history in general. That is the overseer of the poor. How many of you have ever heard of this officer before? All right. How many of you believe that Social Security began with FDR? Social Security, or a form thereof, this is essentially poor relief, is the official name of it, begins with King Henry VIII of England. More famous for his multiple marriages, but he was the first to instruct Parliament to pass legislation that required the smallest unit of local government to take care of the poor. But as you heard our actor, Mr. Kegel, say, deserving poor. That should really be in large font, bold, italics, underlined, because essentially this legislation, which is revised all the way through the early 19th century here in New York, so as an English colony, the poor laws apply here. After independence, New York effectively adopts English common law, just removing any reference to the king and parliament and substituting the governor and the assembly of the state of New York. So poor relief exists, however, and it's paid out of your tax revenue, but it's only for the deserving poor. And it's up to us actually as justices of the peace to decide who is deserving and who is not. There is an officer called the overseer of the poor who's responsible for dispersing those funds for the care of the poor, but also responsible for identifying individuals who can't care for themselves and bringing them here to be judged. Now, for example, a type of person who is automatically considered deserving poor is a widow. So if your husband dies, even though you have certain independent legal rights, it's still presumed under New York law that the husband is the breadwinner. So we see on the rolls of deserving poor widows and their children all the time. An example of someone who would not be considered deserving poor would be the town drunk. And we actually see them discussing this around this period because this is the era when what we today would call at-home care. So the overseer of the poor making sure that the deserving poor have lodgings. They would literally pay farmers to give this person a room, make sure they receive an adequate amount of food per day, and then they would go out and buy clothing for these individuals. But the beginning of the 19th century is where we transition to the poorhouse model, because there's this idea that taking care of the poor in their own communities is way too expensive. It's better to just centralize care because that will be more efficient. And any of you who have read A Christmas Story and Ebenezer Scrooge, you probably have some idea of how great those poorhouses were. So one of the ways that the overseer of the poor would attempt to reduce the amount of tax funding that had to be used to sustain the poor is to take the children of the deserving poor and apprentice them out. And we have records throughout Dutchess County. We'll be exploring this in our next court scenario, where the overseer of the poor would go to the tradespeople in the town, who are more or less always looking for apprentices, bring them before the justices of the peace, and then apprentice these children out. And the agreement is that in exchange for providing food, lodging, instruction in a trade, instruction in reading and writing and arithmetic, 3 suits of clothing per year, including 1 suit for Sundays and holy days, that this apprentice would serve the master or mistress in the case. We have 2 different scenarios about that. And the term would depend on the age and the exact trade, but the whole idea is that the master would then make sure that all of the apprentices' expenses were taken care of, so that this young individual was no longer on the poor rates, no longer an expense to the town. So the overseer of the poor is always looking for ways to pass the expense for the care of the poor on to someone else's shoulders. Responsible public official. So at this point, are there any questions I can answer? Yes, ma'am?
Was he disliked or liked generally?
It depends. One of the reasons that the state in general opted to move to a courthouse situation is that there were some dishonest overseers of the poor who would make back-end deals, get kickbacks from a farmer to say, all right, I'll claim that I'm paying you $50 a year to lodge and board this widowed mother of 3, but in effect, you're going to keep $30 and kick $20 back to me. On the other hand, what we can see in the written record is a lot of honest overseers of the poor who are doing their best under extreme pressure, because they're getting pressure from those who need relief to provide more relief. They're also getting pressure from the town board and the taxpayers to reduce the actual expenses. And they end up being forced to play games like shuttling the poor from one town to another. So you might have heard Mr. Kegel say that Miss Hitchcock could not take her apprentice with her because she had no legal settlement in Poughkeepsie. Legal settlement, essentially means that you were accepted as a member of the town community and that the town will pay for your support. The town doesn't want to pay for anyone that it doesn't have to. So, for example, you may have lived as a widow your entire life in Red Hook, but you were born in Poughkeepsie. So under pressure, the overseer of the poor, Red Hook, would say, well, actually, this woman belongs in Poughkeepsie on their poor rates because she wasn't born here, in which case the justices of the peace would swear out an order for removal, and a constable would take her down to Poughkeepsie, where in all likelihood, the overseers of the poor there would say, wait a second, she was here for like a year as a baby, and then moved up to Red Hook where she's now lived for 40 or 50 years, no way we're sending her back, and their justices of the peace would grant them an order for removal. So you would see often families of poor people being shuttled even across county lines. We have some cases, because they have to document their travels, of overseers of the poor in Westchester County sending people through Dutchess up to Columbia County where they purportedly had a legal settlement, and then they get sent back down again. Any other questions? Yes?
Were the apprenticeship contracts recorded comprehensively with towns, or?
There was a standard form for these. They would have been recorded in the Overseers of the Poor books. In fact, we have the president of the Armenia Historical Society with us today, Betsy Strauss. Armenia is distinct not only for having the oldest surviving municipal records, but they have 2 books of the poor. One that begins in, I believe, 1765, and the other takes it up in 1807. Filled with apprenticeship contracts where they've written out, and you will hear the actual form because in 1814, so a little bit after what we're portraying today, the first guide for how to be a clerk of the court comes out, and it contains all the paperwork you could imagine in it, the oaths that we've sworn today, and the literal letter of these apprenticeship agreements, which were then copied and wrote. Yes, Betsy?
Just wanted to add that in the book, not only does it have the indenture, it has the expenses in every down to the last penny or shilling, and also in the annual town meeting, the records are given as to how much is spent out on each person. And so they were very accountable, and quite often I see the names as overseer of the poor as men who were also justice of the peace themselves. And so they knew the law and were law-abiding and helpful.
Yes, sir.
That reverse bond for the plaintiff, does that still exist?
It does not. We've had a change in the legal system, and they have also had that in England, but today in civil court, what you would normally do is retain a lawyer, because the general sessions are a civil court. The justices of the peace hear both criminal and civil prosecutions. But in the 18th and early 19th century, really up until around the time of the Civil War, if you were bringing a suit, you were expected to prosecute that suit yourself. So unless you were going to hire a lawyer to proceed on your behalf, which many people were doing by 1806, you were expected to show up. And of course, the court does not want to waste its time. So it's going to make you fill out a bond that says if you don't show up to prosecute this case, you're going to pay us money and probably have some jail time and then be prosecuted yourself for wasting the court's time. It took it very serious. So any other questions that I can answer at the moment?
Just one. It's 1813, 1814, the war is raging. What is the expression, the coin of the realm at that point? Because we were in transition from being the colonies of 1776, 1783, the Peace of Paris, and then how did the money? Because we didn't have a national currency really until when?
I believe 1798. 96 and the 1790s, the United States Federal Congress decreed that we would now be on the dollar standard, which of course begins life as a Spanish currency. And there was a slow transition, but by this point in time, we see all damages and other financial sums recorded in dollars and cents.
Even though there was no, for example, the First National Bank of Red Hook printed its own dollar bills, as recently as 1905 and 10.
Well, that is because the legislation that authorized dollars did not authorize paper currency. So it's It's long and complicated, and economists can do a better job of this than I can, but essentially a bank would say, we've got this amount of gold and silver in the vault. We're going to issue this amount of paper, which means if you come to us with $1 of the Bank of Red Hook currency and say, I want a United States dollar coin for it, we can give it to you. But of course, as we saw most recently during the Great Depression and the stock market fall, banks fail all the time. 1929 is nothing new. It starts back in the early 19th century where you have a run on your bank. Everyone decides that the paper is not worth it, so they want hard coin. If the bank doesn't have enough hard coin in its vaults, it's a problem. And the reason why today we are not on either a gold or a silver standard is there's a limited amount of gold and silver available globally. And so it reduces the liquidity, which means interest rates are high. It's hard to get a loan. It's difficult to get credit. We moved off of that because the whole idea is basically a paper dollar bill or any kind of paper currency is only worth the amount of confidence you have in the person giving it to you. So we all hope that everyone remains really confident in the federal government. Now, of course, taking care of the poor is a huge drain on taxpayer resources. It's an expensive prospect. So the other job of the overseer of the poor was to do as much as possible to cut down on taxpayer expenses, to move the price of taking care of these deserving poor people off the shoulders of the government, get a private entity to take care of them. Two ways of doing this. The first is to take the children, these, for example, orphans or children who have lost their father and who are on the poor rolls, and apprentice them to master craftsmen in the community. And this ran the gamut from any form of advanced labor that you can think of. Today we're going to have a scenario around a hatter accepting an apprentice from the overseers of the poor. It also included housework, because learning how to maintain a home as a servant was considered a trick. So often the daughters of the deserving poor were apprenticed out to housekeepers to learn the art. And if you can imagine trying to keep a house clean without, say, a vacuum cleaner and spray cleanser and all of that, it's an art form all of itself. So in our first two scenarios, we're going to be examining that apprenticeship process. In our third scenario, we're going to see how the government dealt with unwed mothers and their children. And they did this essentially the same way that we generally do today, which is to go after the father, to go after child support. So in the early 19th century, the overseer of the poor would identify a father. They didn't make any claims that it was genetic. It was always the putative father. And they would bring this fellow before the justices of the peace to try to get a range of legal things done. The ideal would be that the father cops to it, says, all right, the kid is mine, I will swear out a bond to the town that I will take care of these individuals, both the mother and the child, and if I fail in that duty, I will pay this amount of money to the town government. If that didn't work, the overseer of the poor would try to get the justices of the peace to essentially swear out a bail bond on this individual to have him tried at the county court in Poughkeepsie. And then the trial would go through. You would end up with what's called an order in bastardy. That is the technical term of this document, which would lay out child support that would need to be paid. And if this child support was not paid, then the father would be arrested and prosecuted further. So that is going to be our final scenario. So at this juncture, we are going to move to the apprenticing of the deserving poor adult.
Mr. Burgess, what is our docket for today?
Mr. Cagle, the overseer of the poor for the town of Red Hook, has several matters to bring before the court today.
Mr. Cagle, please approach the bench.
Thank you, Your Honors. First, I would like the case of binding an apprentice. Have a young lady, if you will. Eileen here being a likely, capable young lady. I have engaged with Mrs. Fellows to take her on, to bind her as an apprentice to learn the art and mystery of cookery and keeping house.
Now, Miss, has Mr. Cagle explained what you'll need to do and what you can expect to receive as an apprentice?
No.
Eileen, the law is that you must dwell with Mrs. Fellows, well and faithfully serve her in all such lawful business she may put you unto. Honestly and obediently in all things behave yourself towards Mrs. Fellows, and honestly and orderly behave yourself towards the rest of the family and employers of Mrs. Fellows, who keeps house for many of the fine and upstanding residents of Redmond. In exchange, Mrs. Fellows will teach you the craft, mystery, and occupation of cookery and housekeeping after the best manner that she can. Teach, instruct, inform, or cause to be so. Mrs. Fellows shall also find and deliver unto you sufficient meat, drink, washing, and lodging and apparel for working and holy days, and all other things needful or meet for an apprentice during your term of service. She will also instruct or cause you to be instructed to read, write, and cipher. At the end of your apprenticeship, Mrs. Fellows will deliver unto you 1 good new suit of holy day clothes, 2 good suits for everyday wear, and 1 new Bible. Do you understand and accept these conditions?
I do.
Mrs. Fellows, please approach the bench.
Mrs. Fellows, do you agree to the conditions as just stated, and to provide for your new apprentice, so that she shall not in any way or manner be a charge to the town of Red Hook or the inhabitants thereof?
I do.
Very well. Mr. Barges, be so kind as to fill out the indenture during our next recess.
Good. Thank you, gentlemen. You may both sit.
I do have one more case of apprenticeship that I would like to bring before your honors. If I may have my young lad here. Christopher, I believe. Christopher is an enterprising lad who has expressed to me, his parents being deserving poor, chargeable to the town of Red Hook, interest in the art and mystery and trade of hatting. And as I have seen lately in the papers, advertisements for yourself, Mr. Grankel, seeking an apprentice for this art, I brought Christopher here to see that we may bind him out as an apprentice to yourself.
Well, it's true. I've been in search of a number of smart lads to apprentice to the hatting trade. Tell me, have you ever worked as a hatter before?
No, sir.
Do you have any idea what that involves?
Yes, sir.
Do you? So you know the best way to procure furs and wools and felt them into the finest felt that the town has seen, and block them and finish them finally?
Yes, sir.
Well, very good. This is encouraging. So you accept to take on this trade?
I do.
Oh, very good.
Very good. Now, to again read the letter of the law to you, so that you understand what you are getting yourself into. You must dwell with Mr. Brankel, well and faithfully serve him in all such lawful business as he may put you unto. Honestly and obediently in all things behave yourself towards Mr. Brankel, and honestly and orderly behave yourself towards the rest of the family. In exchange, Mr. Brankel will teach you the craft, mystery, and occupation of hatting, after the best manner that he can teach, instruct, inform, or cause to be so. Mr. Brankel shall also find and deliver unto you sufficient meat, drink, washing, and lodging and apparel for working in holy days, and all other things needful or meet for an apprentice during your term of service. He will also instruct or cause you to be instructed to read, write, and cipher. At the end of your apprenticeship, Mr. Brankel will deliver unto you 1 good new set of holy day clothes, 2 good suits for everyday wear, and 1 new Bible. Do you understand and accept these conditions?
I do.
Mr. Brankel, I assume that you are aware of all of your commitments in this matter?
I am, and I promise that the boy shall not be a charge.
Very good. Are you satisfied, Mr. Cage?
I am.
Do you have any other business to bring before the court at this time?
I do, your honors. I wish to pursue a suit against Jacob Meyer for fathering a bastard child upon the body of Elisebeth Stoll, which has become chargeable to the town.
I see you wish to charge him pursuant to the act entitled, An Act for the Relief of Cities and Towns from the Maintenance of Bastard Children, passed the 6th day of March, 1801.
Yes, I do.
Please call your first witness.
Very good. I have 3 witnesses I intend to call to present the facts of the case. Now I would like to call for Rachel Elisebeth to testify.
Behind you, sir.
Very good.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence you shall give in this matter and the difference between the town of Red Hook and Jacob H. Meyer will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Now, what can you tell us about this case?
I lived in the house of Mary Stolt, mother of Elisebeth Stolt, in the month of May in the year 1811, and continued to live there until sometime after the harvest following. During that time, I frequently saw Jacob Meyer keep company with Elisebeth. During that time, I never saw any other young man or person keep company with her. I always imagined and believed that Jacob Meyer courted Elisebeth and came to see her as a sweetheart. I saw Elisebeth Stolt wear a gold ring, but I do not know how she came by it. Elisebeth behaved decent and well and was generally respected by all her acquaintance and neighbors. Elisebeth Stolt was delivered of a male child on the 29th day of September last past.
Do we have any further questions for this witness? Hearing none, you may step down. Mr. Cagle, please call your next witness.
Very good. I wish to call Thorne Pudney to the stand.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence you shall give in this matter between the town of Red Hook and Jacob H. Meyer shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Now, what can you tell us about this case?
Elisebeth Stolt, daughter of Mary Stolt, widow, worked sometime in the summer of 1811 at my house. Jacob S. Meyer came to my house 2 or 3 times and stayed all night with Elisebeth. I looked upon it that Jacob courted Elisebeth. I was so satisfied about the honest intentions of Jacob toward Elisebeth that I spoke to him freely on that account and concerning that matter. The match was half made between Jacob and Elisebeth, and thereupon told Jacob Phillips to make free, get hay for his horse, and put him in the barn. I have seen Elisebeth wear a ring, but do not know whose it was.
Do we have any questions for this witness? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Thorne. You may step down. Mr. Cagle.
As my final witness, I wish to call Mary Stolt, the girl's mother. Very good.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence you give in this matter and the difference between the town of Red Hook and Jacob H. Meyer will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Very good. What can you tell us about what you have observed from your daughter's experience?
From the spring of the year 1811 until February last, Jacob Meyer visited my daughter Elisebeth, a single woman, very frequently at my house. I thought he came to court her for his wife, and never suspected the integrity of his intentions in that respect, till sometime in the month of March last, when I discovered that my daughter was pregnant of the child of which she was delivered the 29th of September last. As soon as I discovered my daughter's pregnancy and inquired of her who was the father, she answered that it was Jacob Meyer, which she has ever persisted in. I never saw any other man to visit her as a sweetheart. My daughter wore a gold ring some considerable time during her pregnancy and before her pregnancy was discovered. Jacob Meyer pretended the ring was his and insisted to have it. Her daughter insisted he had given the ring to her as a pledge of marriage, but as Meyer refused marrying my daughter, and there was a considerable alliance between our family and that of Jacob's father, with 2 of my sons being married to 2 of Jacob's sisters, to prevent any further family uneasiness, I advised my daughter to send the ring back.
When did you advise your daughter to return the ring to Jacob Meyer?
In the month of December last, when I became satisfied that Meyer had no intention of marrying her.
And how did your daughter respond to this advice?
She refused to return the ring and said that she would report Meyer to the overseers of the poor.
And did your daughter do so?
She did.
Mr. Cagle, why is this issue so late in coming to us? We normally hear from you before the child is delivered.
My apologies, Your Honor. The matter was only brought to my attention December last, and not knowing whether the matter properly resided within the town of Rhinebeck or of Red Hook, I could not bring it to Your Honors until now.
Very good. I believe that we should hear from the mother herself. Is Miss Elisebeth Stolt present?
Yes.
Please come forward if you can.
You do swear in the presence of Almighty God that the evidence you shall give in this matter and the difference between the town of Red Hook and yourself shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Mrs. Stokes, please tell us what happened.
Thank you. I met Jacob Meyer in June of 1811 when I worked for Mr. Putney. I was a housekeeper and I assisted with odds and ends and jobs and also bringing in some of the harvest. Mr. Meyer took a shine to me and we expressed tender feelings and he offered me a gold ring and I accepted that and we saw each other frequently and then in February I became aware I was pregnant and after that he previously began asking for his ring back once that I made that confession. In March last my mother discovered my pregnancy and it was a very, very difficult time. Mr. Meyer stopped visiting then, and I haven't seen him. I mean, his brothers are married to my sisters, so I saw no reason for him not to make do on his promise. And I'm a decent woman, and my son deserves better.
Any questions for this witness? You may sit down. Mr. Cagle, do you see Mr. Myers here today?
I do.
And would you point him out?
Yeah, take him upstairs.
Mr. Meyer, approach the bench and be sworn in.
We need a second Mr. Myers. He seems to have accepted the child willingly.
You now see why I brought this quotation.
See, indeed. Well, in the absence of Mr. Meyer, I believe that we should issue a writ of arrest. Issue an arrest warrant on behalf of this court. Do you all agree?
Yes, certainly.
Very good. Well, then we shall have Mr. Barkis draft us such a writ at after the session of the court is closed.
That's never happened before.
You would think so, but
Well, Mr. Cagle, have you any further business for us at this time?
Not at present. The town is at least satisfied to the extent that it can be with the course of events.
Is there any other pressing business on the docket?
There is not.
Very well. Well, being late in the day, I suggest we adjourn until tomorrow. Agree?
Yes.
Very good. And I declare this court adjourned.
thank you to both our costume interpreter volunteers and also our reading volunteers. If anyone would like to take a break now, I understand, but I will go over a couple of details that I think may be of interest in how we drafted this. So beginning with the apprenticing, there is actually a standard form for this which I was reading. The interesting element from this, and this is contemporary to the 18 teens, is that on the one hand, the apprentice promises to be obedient, not just to the master or mistress, the one instructing them in their art and trade, but also to the family and the customers. But in exchange, they receive a variety of benefits, including meat, drink, washing, so they're also going to pay for the laundry. Lodging and apparel for both working and holy days. That means you get at least one suit of clothes for actually conducting your work in, and another for wearing to church observances, which was practically universal at this point in time. You're also going to be instructed in how to read, write, and cipher. In other words, how to do mathematics. In an era where there was no guarantee of general public education, here in 1813, we're at the beginning of setting up public school systems and public school districts. Something we may talk about next year, if you want to come back here. And of course, you have the deliverables at the end of this apprenticeship, which include 1 good new suit of holy day clothes, 2 good suits for everyday wear, and 1 new Bible. So this is very much a structured agreement. And in certain respects, it's probably a better one than you might potentially receive if you were not a child of the poor. Because you know in this case that the overseer of the poor will be checking up on you to make sure that you're being treated properly, because if you're not receiving everything that you're promised in here, this could potentially be chargeable to the town. And it's all about avoiding that part. So are there any questions about the apprenticeship portion? Yes?
I have a question. You were talking about these time frames here, and I know that in 1812, the town of Red Hook became its own independent town. But you were talking about 1811 and other times. Did Red Hook have a judge at that time, or was it Rhinebeck that had the judge?
At that point in time, all of this was Rhinebeck, both the town of Red Hook and the modern town of Rhinebeck. So any prosecution for violating the poor laws would have been done through the overseers of the poor in Rhinebeck. So Red Hook is created as a separate town, even though it had been a distinct part of Rhinebeck since the mid-18th century. The state legislature creates it as a separate town in June of 1812. Right. The first town meeting is not until June of 1813. So in the midst, you have this gray period where, okay, in the bastardy case, the man and the woman meet in 1811. They have something of a courtship, promises are exchanged, a child is conceived, and the child is born right as the towns are splitting. So you have this confusion that Mr. Cagle referred to of, okay, this woman is resident in Red Hook, but the incident occurred before Red Hook was independent. So how does this all get sorted out? And there's a second part of an answer to your question that I will say in just a bit. I want to make sure that there are no questions on the apprenticeship part before we move to the literal crime of bastardy. Yes?
The reading, writing, and math, I'm assuming the people who are the apprentices might not have known how to teach them. Did they send them to school then?
Yes, that is part of why I was reading that, the actual wording of those contracts, is it is to teach or cause to be teach. Or teach, cause to be taught. That tells you where I am today. Yeah. And also, the other fine print there is that when you're being apprenticed to someone like Mr. Brankel the Hatter, the contract says that he might teach you. But it also allows for him to have someone else teach you. He just has to teach you or have you be taught.
So what about the quality of your education then?
It's I hate to say a crap, but there is some additional information talking about ciphering to the rule of 3, which I personally cannot explain at this juncture. But what we know in terms of education at this point in time is that it has progressed significantly beyond the 18th century, when most reading was taught by the Bible, because the idea was that you needed to be able to read the Bible to be part of any one of the Protestant congregations. Writing, and we see this in the documents, not commonly taught. Even by 1813, we have a lot of people in contracts and court documents making a mark, and then the court clerk, Ms. Burkus, signing underneath it, yes, I've witnessed this person make their mark. So it would depend and vary between the specific context, which is why in the 18-teens, towns throughout Dutchess County are working to set up what we have come to know subsequently as a Little Red Schoolhouse system, where you have multiple districts. And in Red Hook, at the beginning, I think there was something like 9 districts that were set up between 1813 and 1814. They're building schoolhouses, they're hiring teachers. So it's one of the reasons that we focus on this specific era of time. It's not just that the interior of this building is more or less set to that period. It's that this is a stretch of years that is fundamental for the formation of Dutchess County, the Mid-Hubs, and New York as we know them today. But it does not tend to be studied as much as, say, the revolution that precedes it, or the Civil War that follows it.
Was Mr. Keegan's job full-time, or did he have to hold another job?
That's the fun part about being a town official of any stripe. You aren't paid. You serve as a volunteer as part of your civic duties. So Mr. Cagle would probably have been a farmer full-time and then served as, and in many cases, both overseer of the poor and justice of the peace. And that's part of the reason why you see the transition from this at-home care system to a poorhouse care system, because some overseers of the poor were taking kickbacks. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
The whole thrust for education and volunteering, is that because of the passion for democracy?
Education, absolutely, because the founders had in mind that to maintain a republic you need an educated electorate, people who would be free-thinking. And a lot of what we see in early educational texts is built around ideas of American patriotism, the rights of the individual. The serving without pay, actually, you can trace that all the way back to the Roman Empire and further to the Greeks. This idea that if you have made it well in life, you are of a certain elite status that you don't have to work all the time, you have available time. You need to pay it back to the community through service. And that subsequently changed because the idea was, well, if we're truly going to be a society of equals, we need to make an opportunity for people to serve who could not afford to serve voluntarily. That's how we've come to have this change over time. And yes, ma'am.
With the apprentices, what if the person did not work out for some reason? Maybe they didn't have the behavior they should, or maybe they weren't able to keep up with the skill level that was needed, or whatever.
It would depend on which direction that breach of contract went into. If it was a failure on the apprentice's part, then more than likely they would have been returned to their families. And that's another key part of this, is you have to dwell with your master. So the overseer of the poor is separating families. He's saying, you now get to leave your mother and go live with the hatter who may be 5-10 miles away, which is not inconsiderable when you're walking or riding a horse, but not riding a horse at that social level. If the master is the one that fails, then more than likely, I haven't seen this yet, but my guess would be that the overseer of the poor would sue the master for breach of contract and get some money to indemnify the town, but still take the apprentice back away from him. I think if we have one more question on the apprentices.
Oh, it wasn't really a question.
How old were they then, if they're taking them away from their family?
It ranged, it's basically at the point where the overseer of the poor thinks that they can perform independently. So I believe the Amenia books, I'm sorry that Betsy has headed back to Amenia, but I want to say that I've seen as young as 5 and 6 years old apprentice dollar. Because you want to get these people off the poor rates. And I mean, it's not unusual in the general population to see children apprenticed at this age, because you want to make sure that they are set up well in life. So and that means having a trade.
They would visit their family then?
I would suspect so, and you would probably not send them outside of the church that they belong to, so they would at least see each other on Sundays. But we are continuing the study of the poor relief system pre-poorhouse now, so hope to have more details as time goes on. Now the bastardy trial, the crime of fathering bastard child. Everything you heard our witnesses read today was taken from an actual trial. It was the trial for Helena Bogardus and Fishkill in 1759. It's one of 4 trials for which we have plentiful evidence, like the whole kit and caboodle from the overseers of the poor bringing the case forward to depositions from numerous witnesses, including her mother, to an order in bastardy against Jacobus Van Cortlandt to set up a payment system. And it is a heartbreaking tale, because as you heard in this, and the timing was adjusted to fit 1811 and 1813, essentially to our volunteer who was portraying Elisebeth Stoltz. He adjusted it to the age of her child, because that was a real baby, not at all. But everything else, all the particulars about the two lovers living together under the roof of Thorn Putney, of being observed to have this gold ring the whole time, of the mother stating that the families have already married together, and on the one hand she didn't see this coming, but on the other hand she's kind of willing to push it under the carpet. And in the actual trial proceedings that we have from 1759, the mother does not encourage her daughter to take this to the overseer of the poor. She encourages her daughter to give back the ring and not say anything further. It's the daughter who then takes it to the overseers of the poor and says, I want justice, which is similar to our first court scenario where we had an independent woman bringing a suit against a man. Here we have a woman who, in many other contexts, would have just been left adrift without support, who, thanks to New York's legal provisions, can come to the court and say, I need you to intervene on my behalf and ensure that justice is done to me, but most importantly to the child. And that's a major, major part of the poor relief system. And actual names involved, Jacob Myers and Elisebeth Stolt, are both from a recognizance in bastardy that was sworn out here in March of 1814. So these were real people who lived here in Red Hook. Jacob Meyer was prosecuted for fathering a bastard child. We haven't found the rest of the case yet. Any questions on that one? All right, well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again to our volunteers, both costumed and uncostumed. We are here until 4 o'clock, at which time we will look forward to seeing you at a future program.